Hey, and welcome to the fourth and final episode of a four-part collaboration between Shade and Convergence, the South London Gallery's platform for critical conversations, screenings and written commissions. Today I'm in conversation with Axel Kacoutié. Axel is a multi-award-winning audio artist and poet. Let's delve in. I hope you enjoy. So, hello, Axel. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation at the South London Gallery today.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Hi. Well, we are going to be talking about the importance of sound today. So when I talk to my creative guests about the work they're doing now, I always like just to delve a little bit into their childhood first. So we're talking about the sounds that you were taking in as a child from TV and radio. I was wondering when they first resonated with you specifically in terms of the feelings that you may have associated with certain sounds. And I ask this because some of your work that I've been listening to has incorporated media, sounds, conversations, and archival clips so powerfully that I thought that it really gave insight into the impact that our environmental messaging has on us. And then sound is so specific in terms of the memories and feelings that it evokes. And so I just wondered if you think that some of the sounds of your childhood, the news clips and things that you have used in your work, held a special resonance for you as a child.
I mean, that there are layers and layers. I think like this whole podcast can just be based off of this one question because there are so many things so many angles that you can take from this. And I think I've never actually thought about it in that way. I think there's been a real drive perhaps sometimes when I'm trying to build pieces and build spaces or build montages that have a particular resonance emotionally. It's got to hit a certain sense of nostalgia, I guess, is one thing. Or I think sometimes when I'm doing workshops and I'm trying to describe what I'm trying to do, it's just like you're trying to crystallize an instinct that you had when you wanted to make it. So whether you're working with a script or whether you're creating from zero and you're just trying to find sounds, whether it's found sounds or whether it's recorded sounds or a mixture of the both, you're trying to recreate something. I think as an artist, as a creator, whatever you want to call it, I think there is definitely a pursuit of the past in many respects, that you're trying to capture something that meant something to you, whether it was 20 years ago, whether it was yesterday, but you're always kind of chasing that. So I guess with sound in my past, in my childhood, and the media I used to consume, I think I didn't know. It was really like when you reflecting now as you were asking the question and having a proper think, that there's one side where it was the music. I remember realizing that, for example, The Prince of Egypt, that production, that film, that story, it hit so many things in so many different ways. I think it's just like there are there's one song in it, All I Ever Wanted, for example, and how that was remixed in the 10 Plagues, for example. And I never realized, I was like, oh, he just transposed the same song and the same melody but just singing it completely differently. It's like, oh, that's why I really like this. That's why that delivered line of "this was my home" as opposed to "this is my home" was just something like, it was like, oh, okay. So it's what I'm doing now. I think my work now is almost kind of like trying to illustrate, trying to describe the things, the devices, the moments that I really enjoy, to give words to that or just give space to that. So like, for example, I used to consume a lot of anime, as a lot of kids did back in the day, and one of my favorite shows was a series called Gundam Wing, and it's essentially like Transformers but Japanese. I think that's the simplest way I can put it. And they, instead of the Transformers having a life of their own, you had pilots that would jump into their chest and pilot them. The mechanics of their movements, they had a digga-jing, and I listened to the soundtrack as well, and they're not long. They're little splashes of moments, and the sentiment. There were moments where the combination of the right soundtrack with hearing those robotic footsteps, for example, was just it just did something for me that I didn't realize. I still can't describe it now, but it's fun. It's perfect. It was just, I could relate to it in some way, shape or form, relating to a robot that's just like quietly about to self-destruct and save half of the nation that they were fighting for or something like that. I don't know. Like it's little things like that. I remember as well Jurassic Park. I mean, even to this day, whenever it comes on, my sister will never fail to mention or remind me that the Velociraptor sound. I'm gonna do it. Sorry, because like something like that.
Yeah.
When they're looking for the two kids in the kitchen, for example, I think my mum's home. If you could, if there was like a sonic fingerprint of just like the history, if there was a black box in the house, I think there would be a significant amount of Velociraptor imitations and me trying to walk around like a T-Rex. And I think quite recently, for example, I discovered watching a composite video of the sounds that they did to layer the sounds of the T-Rex, for example, and it just blew
Ah,
my mind. It's like, what? It wasn't it they weren't, you just don't think about it. But then after that, when they mentioned, for example, there were giant redwood trees, LA redwood trees that were
mm,
falling, they captured that sound and layered that with what just like normal footsteps as a whole. But for me, like that idea of trees falling to represent the sound of a dinosaur, it's like
yeah,
I don't know, like it just seems so natural, like because you don't think anything else. You don't watch a T-Rex step and think, oh, it sounds like a bird. No, you just think that's the sound. And whenever you lift the veil and reveal the mechanics behind it, it's like, oh, it actually doesn't ruin the magic. It actually makes it even more exciting. So
yeah.
like it was all these things, I guess, little details from films, whether it's the soundtrack combination with the sounds of a rocket or sounds. I'm as I'm saying this, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of space. That was definitely where my head was at. That was
Mm,
definitely what I connected to and with a lot more. There was something emotionally in that kind of like, I don't know, the lonely space person, or these fantastical creatures that, of course, they exist, but we're told otherwise they don't. That kind of like,
yeah,
yeah, magic
yeah,
in that
yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah.
was, well, yeah, was something there.
And do you remember at which point you were so taken by this magic that you
Mm,
decided to immerse yourself fully into the potential that audio had in communicating your positioning within society? At what point did you decide or feel that it was right that you were going to choose to work within the medium of sound, and that's
mm.
the way that you wanted to tell stories?
Wow. Okay. I think biographically, if there was a timeline, the most obvious point where I myself consciously realized that there's a power in storytelling with audio, with sound, would be when How to Remember came out and the response for that. I think I never ever anticipated that, because for me it was such a personal production that I was just grateful for, to finally given an opportunity to say. And when I say finally, I mean like I had this idea for 3 years, and
Mm,
procrastination, or not really knowing what to say, or not really knowing how to formulate the thoughts and the emotions in a comprehensive way. So when I was given that opportunity in the Shortcuts piece by Eleanor McDowell, who I'm
mm,
forever grateful for her and her executing skills and her encouragement, and yeah, everything, because it was from my perspective my debut, like I guess like my radio debut, my storytelling debut, and
mm,
sound design debut as a whole, like everything, as opposed to when I was younger, it was music or it was poetry, though everything was quite separate. I didn't know that what I was doing essentially when I was putting together my poetry pieces was essentially the same thing. Consciously, I would say it's when How to Remember came out. I remember again as a kid, probably like 5 or 6, or maybe even, but yeah, 4, 4, 6, whatever, when blank cassettes, or cassettes that my mom wasn't listening to anymore, mom, can I just like record myself? And again, it was like a little radio show
ah,
with my sister,
yeah.
and we would just, yeah, just sit in front of the radio, just chat nonsense, but
Oh, that's
you know,
so beautiful.
and just for fun, we'd listen and play back. Years would go by, listen and play back, kind of thing like that. From using the medium to be, to center yourself and realize, like you got however long a piece of tape, 15 minutes of tape, literal tape of like just chatting the most and like having the most free and fun space to do that. That memory that I actually didn't, I forgot about that memory. It wasn't until maybe again like this year, last year, when even after How to Remember, that I remembered my link to telling stories, or to, yeah, like centering myself for fun.
Just telling that story of you and your sister recording on the
Mm,
tapes, it's just reminding me how important that freedom and that space of childhood, how
mm,
important it is for the formation of things that we don't know how that's gonna
mm.
reappear later on down the line, or how those experiences are gonna affect us, or
Yeah.
how they've been embedded within us for the future. And I'm glad that you mentioned How to Remember, because I've listened to that a good few times, and I've definitely shared it a lot with friends. It's like, you've got to listen to this. Like, I just love it, the way that you interdispersed clips from childhood memories. So there were clips of your voice as a
Mm.
child in that. But you were exploring identity, and I loved it that you moved between the lightness of the sounds of childhood, and your mum was calling your name like Axel,
Yeah.
Axel, and it was just like you're just instantly immersed in your childhood space, and then
Mm,
there's a jolt, and it quickly moves to clips like archival British media
mm,
clips where blackness is portrayed as negative, and
mm.
god, that, we heard Thatcher's voice, and like we
Yeah.
just heard so much, and these sounds relate so perfectly to our everyday experiences of duality
Mm,
within society. And I just wonder how the process is for you working on a piece like that when it is so personal. Like you did touch on that, it took
mm.
took 3 years, but just how does it feel for you as you're creating that piece and you're going to release something quite personal out into the world?
Hmm. Oh
Because
my
it's
gosh.
hard.
It,
It's
it it's
hard.
hard. It is absolutely terrifying as well. I
Yeah.
think like it's the line that I had with me for the 3 years prior to actually having 3 months to make it finally was, you don't know what it means to be black because you don't know what it means to be one thing. That
Yeah.
was what was has been circulating, was still is for arguably the line that I've always held, and it was forever my jumping point. And what this was, I guess, for me making this was a confession to all the things that I guess we've internalized. Essentially, that when describing race as a whole, it's more behavioral things rather than biological things. I like chicken because it's delicious, not because it's in my DNA. For
Yeah.
example, like the whole thing about rhythm is just because we're encouraged as a family to dance. So of course you're more likely to value that as a whole as opposed to another art form, for example.
Mm.
It's a real enmeshment of that. And then after that, like again, when not being black enough, I guess it was kind of like really peeling away what I understood blackness to be, and then as a result whiteness, because for me, my experience was always that was a dichotomy. Forget all the
Mm.
other races, forget all the other kind of identifiers. Those are the two things that we're pitted against forever. That was scary because in my head, am I sounding like this? Am I trying to remove myself from blackness? Am I trying to run away from something? Is this
Mm.
a cowardly thing? Is this a confessional thing? Is this I don't even know. But it's like that. Just turn that volume down. See what happens when you actually do finish what you're trying to say. If
Mm.
this piece was a shape, how integral is this? Is the each face of the cube, when you press on it, does it still stay that same way? The whole thing for me was like, if I could read this without the sound design, without the music and all these kind of things, it's like, if I could just read it to you, would you be able to understand where I'm coming from and what I'm trying
Mm.
to say? My trip to Cote d'Ivoire wasn't intended for this piece. It was more just personal archival memories, really. Like, I think that's kind of like the theme of this all, like even from the family montage that we hear at
Mm.
the end, and hearing me growing up to my trip to Cote d'Ivoire, it was all of this was just like for personal memories. And then after that, because like I those tickets are expensive going back, whether it's the Caribbean, whether it's in
Yeah.
Africa, it's there's a conversation to be had about someone who is born from these places originally, and like the
Mhm.
that diasporic connection to just up and go as he please. It's quite, yeah,
Absolutely,
there's another
absolutely.
conversation with that, but
Yeah,
like it's
absolutely.
but there was something about that being like, I don't know when I'm going to come back, because I don't know when I can literally afford a ticket to come back to see
Mm.
my grandma, to see my family, and to hear these sounds again and to enjoy them. So let me just record everything from taxi trips to me visiting my grandma again for the first time. So there's some nice real candid, beautiful moments there that I will forever cherish. And maybe again they will be shared in another piece. But yeah, like everything, all of this, I guess, to answer your question directly, was used as a confessional thing of like, I'm not trying to reconcile who I am. I'm not trying to say I know anything. In fact, I'm saying I don't know. And like, literally, that's my first sentence. I don't know. I personally think it's quite nonsensical, this game that we're playing. Toni Morrison says is exactly that. Racism is a distraction. And the whole thing about having that montage at the end with my family was just kind of like, before I was black, this is who I am. I kind of feel like in common parlance we have a default or a reflex to polarize, I think. And I think because of that fabric, that texture being there, that's why doing something like this, where I'm saying it's not either or, it's and, it's all, it's grey, all of that, you know, it's quite a scary thing to do. It feels scary to say, hey, I actually don't know, you know, like I'm actually a bit confused about this, and you know, like, should we investigate together? Should we try to be, you know, nice and brave and hold hands into into this interrogation of what we think blackness is and what we think whiteness is, and you know, be kind about it, but look it in the eyes, look at these things that we are all playing a part and sleepwalking in.
And the strength came from the confessional aspect of depicting and sharing the multiple identities. It really reminded me of the idea of the second sight that W.E.B. Du Bois
Ah,
talks
yeah.
about, and the double seeing, especially as a Black artist, you know, the idea that there's a veil which
Mm,
divides us, you know, from the white gaze and its assumptions of us and the
mm.
realms in which we must function and the games that we play in order to get by. I was just wondering if the act of writing and reading out your work
Hmm.
relieves that tension.
Yeah. I mean, straight away, I would definitely say yes. There's definitely
Mm,
like a cathartic element of being able to. I mean, because I mean, now because I have a 10-month old now, so obviously I haven't had the time as much. But like to definitely to journal and you know, let that be the space and the place where I speak freely. You cannot remove yourself from society. You are
mm,
a colleague, you are a friend, you are a lover. You all these things to different people. So and if
mm,
you aren't able to temporarily, because I think that's the most we can ever try to do, temporarily just carve a space for yourself to kind of sit in the waters that make you what you think you are. And I say waters because it's exactly that. It's something that can be contained but not held, if that
mm,
makes sense. Being conscious of it, but trying to imagine and trying to feel and trying to connect with how it is you are who you are without negations. Everything is in relation with everything
mm,
else. So I think once I understood that, it's trying to find that in between, that nebulous, that gray, that subtle answer. It's something that you can't hold, but you can always point to, I guess. And I think, yeah, with what Du Bois says about that second sight, it's so true, and I think it's useful to the craft of speaking on a truth, but there are layers to this. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance trying to understand double sight as a whole, whether you are black or not, whether you can
yeah.
relate to it or not. It's that these are very deep psychological propositions that he's making, you know, and so it's definitely not shallow, but it says a layer at the top of that, and there's a bit beyond the sight of anyone as well that I'm just like, that's where I want to I want to swim in more. The social awareness of who you are and how you fit in whatever society you see yourself in, you know, there's that, but then after that there's you beyond all of this too, and that's another layer closer to the core of existence, closer to the core of the self. How you then relate to that double consciousness is then even more interesting, I think, because then after that, you know, on one hand, it doesn't matter how you see yourself. I'm less inspired to code switch because it's all you feel a bit more empowered because people are judging you on that. It means that it's a very superficial thing. You are, but then again, equally, you have to respect that because that's the difference between getting the funding and not. It's annoying to learn how to play this kind of game and feel beyond it, feel above it, but
Mm,
understanding, you almost kind of repurposing why you have to do it as opposed to just feeling victimized by the need to do it. You almost kind of like, it brings new meaning to why you do it, almost because
mm.
you understand that you've gone beyond that awareness of the double consciousness.
To end this conversation, I hope you're comfortable with me
Mm.
asking, but I would really love it if you could share a short piece of writing of your choice, either of your own work or of work that inspires you, and maybe something that you come back to again for a sense of grounding.
Absolutely. Struggle for Integrity transcript. I've actually have the book, but again, that's because I forgot. Here we go. And then after
I can't even imagine what your computer hard drive is like. I mean,
that. Oh my gosh, the way I had to, well, this year has been the year of the upgrade. This piece in itself is something I listen to. It has its own cycle of when I systematically listen to it, because it really does describe the cycle of creativity and the courage that one needs to dig up, essentially. It's the artist's struggle for integrity.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's so interesting that you've chosen that piece because that is the piece that I used as like the focal point for the whole series to keep referring back to this whole season. So
Oh,
yeah,
really? Great, great, great. You must understand that your pain is trivial except insofar as you can use it to connect with other people's pain. And insofar as you can do that with your pain, you can be released from it. And then hopefully it works the other way around too. Insofar as I can tell you what it is to suffer, perhaps I can help you to suffer less. And that, yeah, from James Baldwin's Artist Struggle for Integrity, it's just I go back to listening to this because it's just whenever I feel like I'm running low in any way, shape, or form, or I've got a mind block, just this whole process in how he describes the artist's awakening of realize how different they are or what they seem to see is disconnected from what people choose not to see or turn a blind eye to, or it's just and then it has the courage to speak on that. The audio world is exactly the space where you don't need to be even fit somewhere, you just need to create, and somehow people gravitate towards the work, and it's a wonderful and special thing to happen.
thank you so much, Axel. That was a beautiful ending to a wonderful conversation and to the whole series. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much.